On Primetime Politics, Jumpstart.
In recent decades, it's become too difficult to build in this country.
The Carney government tables a One Canadian Economy bill aiming to fast-track projects of national significance and drop federal barriers to internal trade. Is this the move industry has been waiting for to invest? We'll speak with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Also, the Prime Minister wants this bill passed before Parliament breaks for summer, but what hurdles could it face to prevent that from happening? The Ottawa Bureau Chiefs are standing by. And hitting back on Trump's 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, the Mayor of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, joins the program. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, for months now, Canadians have been hearing the Prime Minister promise to build faster and at speeds never seen before, all the while promising to build the Canadian economy by also dropping barriers to interprovincial trade. Well, today, the Carney government made a significant move in hopes of achieving those goals, tabling a bill that's been titled the One Canadian Economy Act. It all begins with simplifying how projects get approved in this country.
In recent decades, it's become too difficult to build in this country. Right now, to receive approval, major projects must undergo numerous reviews and assessments that often happen sequentially, one after another, rather than simultaneously, all at once. That process is arduous. It takes too long, and it's holding our country back. For too long, when federal agencies have examined a new project, their immediate question has been why. With this bill, we will instead ask ourselves, how?
So that is the intent from the Prime Minister himself to talk about practicalities and impact. We're now joined by Pascal Chan. He is the Vice President, Strategic Policy and Supply Chains for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Pascal, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So, of course, a big bill here from the government, but the big question really is whether or not this will be enough to jumpstart investment. What do you think?
Well, first of all, we're going through a period of turmoil right now in our trading relationship with the U.S., and businesses have been feeling that. They've been dealing with uncertainty for months now. The steel and aluminum industries have been dealing with tariffs as well since March, and so it's been very complicated for businesses to plan and invest. Now, that said, it was incredibly encouraging to see the Prime Minister prioritize tackling internal trade and nation-building projects in his electoral platform, and we're pleased to see that there's been this intention to capitalize on that momentum that's been building over the last few months by first convening the premiers almost right away and then tabling this legislation, and certainly to move quickly to start eliminating some of these remaining federal barriers to internal trade, but also to make progress on this agenda to start building the trade infrastructure we need to ultimately expand our trade capacity and diversify our trade partnerships.
Okay, so the signals, as you say, this week bookended by the First Minister's meeting, now this piece of legislation. But again, is this enough to get investors on side? Because ultimately that will be the proof in this pudding whether or not this is a success.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll have to see, because it's very difficult for us to just transpose the trade that we have with the United States. Our economies and our supply chains are so integrated at this point. We're talking about $3.6 billion in daily cross-border trade, and so when that relationship with our closest ally and largest trading partner is in jeopardy, we now see a light shown on what we should be doing to kind of expand and diversify. And it's not going to be easy. We're not going to be able to just move that over to other markets. But these are important signals and steps that businesses need to see, and frankly have been calling for some years now, to move forward in the direction and build the infrastructure that we need to be able to move products across this country and beyond, and to show that Canadians can reliably deliver the goods.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you use the word infrastructure, and I'll jump on that point because I hear what you're saying. This could be that positive sign that industry is waiting for. But the bill does have two parts, and one is, as we said right off top, the approval process. The Prime Minister looking for a 2-year window rather than what it has worked out to be 5 years, if not longer. Is that 2-year window a positive sign? Is that enough, do you think, for industry?
Well, it's definitely a step in the right direction if you're talking about going down from 5 years to 2 years. Absolutely, permitting on these processes are incredibly important. You look at some projects like Roberts Bank Terminal 2 for the Port of Vancouver and then Contrecoeur for the Port of Montreal. These projects have been talked about for over a decade now, and we're still not actually in the process of building them. So anything that is going to speed up that permitting and allow us to build projects and this signal from government that it's time to stop slowing these things down and get to work on building these nation-building projects is incredibly encouraging. So obviously we welcome this legislation and we hope that this is going to be passed quickly and that everybody's able to get to work and we can start expanding that trade that we need so dearly.
Now, the second part of this beyond approval process is internal trade. And ultimately, this is not the grand deal involving all provinces and territories. This is just federal regulations. Is that enough?
Well, first of all, removing any federal exemptions that remain under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement is that most obvious solution for the federal government. Tackling other regulatory burdens where there's duplication at multiple levels of government or lack of harmonization can also help, though there typically does remain a provincial element to the equation. Now, we've certainly seen great leadership from the premiers in Ontario, Nova Scotia, and now Quebec, who have tabled legislation to that effect. We've also seen some memorandums of understanding signed looking to support removal of barriers and advance mutual recognition, with hopefully more to come given what we've heard from the Prime Minister that there is some considerable enthusiasm around the table to make progress. But we will have to see because there is an immense portion to be done by the provincial governments.
Yeah, as you say, a bit of a wait and see on that, but certainly, again, a significant bill from the government. Pascal, always appreciate the insight. Thank you for the time this evening.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Well, let's continue our conversation now about this One Canadian Economy bill. Mia Rabson is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for LaPresse. Hello to all of you.
Hello there.
Hello.
I like how you leaned over to JD. Like you don't know him. But listen, so here we have a very ambitious bill from this government. And at the same time, not only an ambitious bill, Mark Carney saying he wants this passed before the House rises for the summer, which, if it's on schedule, is a little more than 2 weeks' time. Does he have the political capital to get this done, Tonda?
Well, you know, he surprised us by winging through a bunch of votes this week, didn't he?
He did that.
Nobody stood up to oppose him. Yeah. So perhaps he does. The thing is that during the last campaign, all parties sort of agreed on the need to move with speed to expedite a whole bunch of resource development projects in the face of the Trump challenge. And so perhaps he does. Notwithstanding the complaints that we have heard and may perhaps hear more of from Indigenous groups, leaders, advocates saying that we haven't had enough time to really consult on this and that you're failing to meet the standard of getting our free, prior and informed consent that's enshrined in law. So look, I think that perhaps is going to be one of the big obstacles. Environmental concerns may be another big obstacle to a lot of this if in fact projects are rushed through reviews. But look, 2 years is what they're calling a fast track, and they're kind of opening a window of 5 years to get a bunch of this stuff through those fast tracks. That's all still, one would think, time to do some of these reviews. So let's see.
Yeah, we'll see. JD, what do you think?
Well, it just shows again the ambitious agenda that Mr. Carney has, and he will need still the collaboration of the other parties. And there's still some stuff to set up. There's no committee yet of the House of Commons that have been set up formally, so that's a part of the business of adopting some legislation. So those needs to be set up, and there's 2 weeks left to go. So some committees may want to hear some witnesses. So it might be difficult to meet that deadline that Mr. Carney is fixing. Still, you see that Mr. Carney is still surfing on the momentum of facing the United States and the tariffs and the threats from the United States to push transformation of the Canadian economy. And for now, I think there's some unanimity around that goal, except, as Tonda mentioned, First Nations want to be part of the equation as well. And Mr. Carney has been clear on that today, but will he be as clear as he pretends to be. Will it satisfy the First Nations? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, it remains to be seen. Although when you talk about unanimity, I'm also just coming back from Saskatoon. There certainly was a lot of support for moving quickly.
Yeah, they were singing Kumbaya out there. But, you know,
Doug Ford comparing him to Santa Claus.
And then right away ran into the Indigenous concerns.
Yeah. So what do you think about the political capital issue here?
I mean, I think he probably has the political capital to get this through the House of Commons. Sounds like Pierre Poilievre has suggested that Conservatives will support this legislation. Getting it through the House of Commons is only the first step. And that's what I've been hearing from a lot of Indigenous leadership and also environment leaders. You can pass this legislation, but if you still end up in court, does it actually fast track anything? And Indigenous communities in particular are already saying that there's a lot of red flags on this legislation for their free, prior, informed consent requirements and you know, their rights to that. And you know, you want to fast track projects, you're not going to do it if you end up in court. I mean, this is what happened with Stephen Harper and the Conservatives during that government. I mean, a lot of things didn't get built because we were in court, and so that, you know, that does not actually help. So I'm hopeful that the government has that in mind, but they want to move fast. I think it's also notable, to Tonda's point, you know, 2 years and 5 years. That in Canada is actually fast tracking because it takes many more years than that most often to get projects from start to finish. And so, like, it sounds like not a lot, like sounds like a long time, but it is in Canadian terms actually fast tracking.
And I will point out that when you go through the bill, he does mention Indigenous consultation. They also, of course, mentioned it in the throne speech. So what that looks like in practical form is something we're going to have to follow.
It's all about that, isn't it? As we saw from the Justice Minister this week, who didn't really know his file on this, or knew the file, put it forward frankly, and then dialed it back as soon as he faced some criticism. So, you know, I just
saying that it was not an effective veto
he's
for
saying
Indigenous
it wasn't
communities.
an effective veto, and in fact, that is the accurate representation of the law. Legally, it's been interpreted that way, as not to accord a blanket veto to communities, to Indigenous groups. However, the courts have also enshrined a very, I guess, meaningful duty to consult and accommodate, and to it puts a lot of onus on project proponents and the government to respect the community's rights, address their interests. And Mark Miller, a former minister on both those files, Indigenous and Crown Relations and Services, you know, explained it very clearly, and also said, you know, you can take a CEO approach to this when you can send in you can send in your government relations people or your lawyers to talk to communities, but you're only going to get a middleman discussion. Send in your CEO to respect them and listen to them and actually deal with them. You know, let's see if Mr. Carney is that kind of a prime minister. Is he prepared to put his capital on the line to get and secure the group's consent?
You could see the influence of Mr. Carney's in this government, obviously because he's the prime minister, but the change of tone. He's putting a lot more emphasis on blue liberals philosophy, business. He wants to recreate business confidence in Canada, investing in projects. We've seen many projects being abandoned in the past because businesses got tired of waiting. Mia was talking about long time period before they got approvals. It could be from 10 to 15 years in some cases. That's too long for businesses to move ahead with projects, and that's what Mr. Carney wants to change. And that, I think, is also part of the strategy. There are projects that will be financed by Ottawa, but he also wants the private sector to get involved.
Private sector money.
Because Ottawa can't finance anything, and that's one of the strategy part of it.
Because it's only catalytic.
I will also point out, however, that some Indigenous leaders were already unhappy with the short period of time they had to even consult on the bill. Like, they were given some details and briefings ahead of time. They only had a day or two to respond, and they didn't think that was enough time. So, like, Mark Carney wants to move really, really fast, but not necessarily all of the people who have to be consulted want to move as fast as he does.
And can I say, the two examples he also raised was how quickly they came up with Expo 67 and the St. Lawrence Seaway. And all I can think of, well, that was a different time when consultation was not so big on the agenda for government.
And environmental.
It was prior to the repatriation of the Canadian Constitution, which has constitutionalized treaty rights and land claims and rights to be consulted. So Mr. Carney can look back to those old projects, but we're in a different world, and you can't necessarily run government the way you run business.
And also, the environment was an afterthought.
Exactly.
Yeah. Listen, I got to move on. I only have about 4 minutes here, but I want to pick up on the other part of the bill, because, you know, moving projects quicker is one part. The other part has to do with internal trade, and what was announced today is essentially dropping the federal barriers to internal trade. This is not the grand deal between the provinces and the territories. How significant or insignificant is this move, Tonda?
Well, it's not really clear to me. I mean, I guess that there are some provisions, federal regulations around internal trade that relate to national security, perhaps that will remain. I'm not clear even what those are. Honestly, I don't really know what they've done and what's left to do. As of really 2017, they've been talking about, since they struck an Internal Free Trade Act in Canada, of doing this. Last year, they set in motion a consultative process, and Anita Anand at that time apparently knocked down a bunch of barriers, and in March they did the same. So what's left and what really is being brought to bear here? That's not clear to me, but I think the biggest barriers are things like the interprovincial, say trucking regulations, or regulations on certifying who's a practicing nurse or dentist in this province or that province. Like that's the nuts and bolts. Just like the projects part of that bill and the trade barriers part, it all comes down to what are the details, what are, the rubber hits the road on what projects they're going to accelerate, and it hits the road on what barriers they're dropping, and that's not really clear.
Well, it is clear that most of the heavy work has to be done by the provinces because they instituted those barriers between themselves. And the federal government, it's more, not symbolic, but it's maybe 15% of the barriers are from Ottawa. And they want to show leadership by saying, we're going to do it. Please follow the example. And most provinces, well, I think 7 out of 10 provinces now have reached deals to try to eliminate those problems. So
not everything, though.
Not everything. No,
Quebec doesn't drop its construction regulations.
That's true,
Newfoundland hasn't dropped its fish processing regulations.
But most of it, I think, it's going to be an improved situation par rapport à what we have right now.
Yeah, but no, sorry, I'll let you say.
I mean, all I was going to add to that is that I think that what a lot of Canadians were hearing every time Mark Carney said that they would do this by July 1st is that they would all be gone by July 1st. They were not actually hearing the word federal. He was always clear it was federal, but I don't think most Canadians really were, they were hearing, oh, everything done by July 1st, and that is just not going to happen.
They heard one Canadian economy, not 13.
I mean, there is progress absolutely between the provinces, but to Tonda's point, like it's not going, no province is going to drop everything because provincial jurisdiction is still, king in this country.
Well, but what's interesting is that, again, this is not the grand deal. And if Mark Carney was talking solely about the federal regulations, which you say he was, when they talk about the potential that internal trade unleashes, they're not just talking about the federal component of that. They're talking about all components of internal trade.
This bill is not going to unleash that internal economy because most of those big barriers are between the provinces.
And I guess also a question for me, and just quick go around here. How important is it that Ottawa is willing to surrender its portion of reviews to the provincial portion? Is that symbolic enough to get people to come to the table with more?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about their objective of applying one project review to big projects, I think also the devil is in the details on that. If you have, for example, the designation of a project like a Western Energy Corridor, where those provinces are likely to be able to land on agreement that one review may be done by the feds or one review may be done by Alberta, can be the referee of all the disputes for that particular portion. But as soon as you get it going across, say, provinces that aren't necessarily in line, perhaps Ontario, Quebec, with whatever pipeline might come forward as a result of these proposals, I think then it's going to be really tricky to get agreement on who gets to decide, who gets to be the referee.
30 seconds.
In Quebec, that proposal is a winner. François Legault loves that proposal because there's an institution called the BAP, le Bureau des Évaluations Environnementales, and it's very, very strict and very, very done a lot of studies in the past that were very well received. So if that supersedes the federal government, Quebec will be very happy.
I love it.
Okay. Yep. Quick last word to you, Mia.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens when those provincial reviews don't necessarily go as far as the federal government would want or would be demanded of in terms of environmental risks and things like that. I mean, does the Alberta review or the Manitoba review actually look at the Species at Risk Act or the Fisheries Act at the level that federal law actually requires? And if it doesn't do that, even if this legislation allows them to go around that, they're going to be challenged in the court.
Okay. Well, as I say, a major piece of legislation. We're watching it go through. We'll see if it catalyzes more actions here in Ottawa. Tonda, JD, Mia, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, against this backdrop of Canadian economic development, there are, of course, real trade pressures right now, among them steel and aluminum tariffs. On Wednesday, the Trump administration slapped another 25% on those products that come from Canada, doubling the tariffs that were already in place and that were already leading to economic pain here in Canada. The Prime Minister said talks are underway right now to try and resolve the issue. According to labor organizers in this country, without a reversal or some major move from governments, the tariffs could lead to tens of thousands of jobs being lost on this side of the border. Well, for his thoughts on how Canadian officials should be responding to these 50% tariffs, we're now joined by Matthew Shoemaker, the Mayor of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Mayor Shoemaker, thank you for making the time.
For having me.
Listen, we now know that the Prime Minister and the U.S. President, along with members of their respective teams, they have been engaged in discussions, trying to negotiate not just, steel and aluminum, but other trade and security matters as well. So given that knowledge that's now been reported widely, does that give you any comfort at all that, the economic challenges that your city faces is getting the attention it needs from federal officials?
It's me, I guess, a bit of optimism, but excuse me, what concerns me is if they're focusing entirely on negotiating an agreement without a plan B for what happens in the event a negotiated agreement doesn't come to fruition. So what I'd like to hear from the federal and provincial levels is that there is a plan in place that if they do not get a negotiated agreement by the time the G7 rolls around week after next, that they will have supports for workers in place if there are job losses, which there are expected to be in short order, and either they could work on it in a number of ways, but immediate procurement of steel for defense contracts, or lines of credit with long time frames to pay them back, things of that nature that will help get them through until a negotiated agreement can be reached.
Okay, so various supports, as you say, that you want to be outlined by the federal government. What we have heard from Prime Minister Carney is that they are considering retaliatory tariffs if these talks do not work out. What do you make of hitting the Americans back with counter tariffs?
Well, it worked in 2017-18 when the 25% tariffs were on Canadian steel, or global steel, last time around. So what really shook the logjam loose back then was retaliatory tariffs targeted at Republican districts in swing states. So that was oranges from Florida, it was coal from West Virginia. It was areas that the Republicans wanted to either maintain their seats or win new seats, and that is what got Canada out of the crosshairs last time when we retaliated, and we retaliated firmly. So I would like to see retaliatory tariffs planned for, even if they're not implemented only until after a negotiated agreement fails to be reached, if that does happen. Although I think obviously the most desirable outcome would be that a negotiated agreement is reached.
Yeah, negotiated, as you say. As all this plays out, I do wonder, Mayor, what are you hearing from people in your community? The steel industry plays such, I don't have to tell you, plays such a big part in the Sioux's prosperity. I can imagine that is creating a lot of anxiety right now for people there.
Yeah, it's really a mix of anxiety and anger. Excuse me. And the anger is directed, unfortunately, at our American counterparts across the river. I like to tell my counterpart in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, the mayor of Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, that it's not Americans writ large that we're upset about, or that we're upset with. It's the American administration in Washington, but it is being taken out on Americans at our doorstep by people not going over the bridge to travel, to buy, their groceries, or to go to the state campground, or to go even further afield into Mackinac Island for a tourism weekend, right? Or a weekend, away. So you have seen bridge traffic decline significantly because Canadians are upset with the American government across the river. And the anxiety on the Canadian side of the border is, will my job be here in the next few weeks? And I think that is, the CEO of Algoma Steel has said, the tariffs make their American business unviable. And so that's giving a lot of people well-founded concern that they may not have a job if these tariffs stretch out for any period of time.
Okay, in terms of jobs, Mayor, how many are you expecting to lose, fearful of losing, and how soon?
Well, 30 or so have been lost already. Another 50 look like are going to be imminently lost. It's a mill of 2,700 people. So that is, getting to a significant percentage once you add those up. But the threat is that 50% of the steel produced here goes into the U.S., and at a 50% cost increase, it's unviable. So if you lose 50% of your customers overnight, and you can't replace that with something else like defense purchasing or supports from the federal or provincial government, then your balance sheet is going to dry up pretty quickly, and you're going to have to start shutting down major processes or major lines in those processes. So it would not be, unheard of to think that a big chunk of the workforce could be facing layoffs if these extend for too long.
So we have about 30 seconds here, Mayor. I wonder if you might share, just look right into the camera, to every federal official that's listening to this interview right now. What's your message to them, not just from you, but from the people of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario?
Yeah, the message is that the Sault Ste. Marie needs your help. Hamilton and Regina need your help. These are places that without steel, there is no, the communities can't survive without the steel foundation that forms part of our economy. In Sault Ste. Marie, that's 50% of our economic activity. So without direct purchases and quick of Canadian steel, without supports for workers who lose their job and quick, we cannot wait for a negotiated settlement beyond the next 7 to 10 to 14 days. If that negotiated settlement doesn't come, we are in dire straits here in these communities.
Mayor Matthew Shoemaker, thank you for this. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks very much.
And that is Primetime Politics for this evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend.